Before the first dinosaurs walked the earth, there were already entire worlds' vast oceans filled with armored fish, forests of giant ferns and towering lycopsids, and strange reptiles testing the limits of survival. For nearly 200 million years, life rose and fell in waves, each extinction rewriting the story, each recovery inventing something new. These are the forgotten chapters of deep time, long before the giants we all know, when the earth itself was still deciding what life could become. Welcome to Deep Time Mysteries. Life before the dinosaurs, a journey across the ages, when oceans birthed pioneers, forests reshaped the air, and cataclysms nearly erased it all. If you're fascinated by the hidden past of our planet and want to travel further into the mysteries of life's origins, make sure to subscribe to Beyond Our Dawn, new explorations into prehistory. Extinction and rebirth await. Don't miss the next chapter. The Devonian period begins 419 million years ago, and for nearly 60 million years, it unfolds like a story told in two voices, one sung by the seas, and one whispered by the land. To enter the Devonian is to step into a world half familiar and half alien, a planet reshaping itself in silence. Continents drift like slow rafts, colliding, lifting mountains, and stretching shallow seas across their margins. Those seas, warm and full of light, are the stage for a dazzling experiment, the reign of fishes. Imagine standing on a cliff above one of those seas. Below you, the water is alive with armored placoderms, their heavy bony plates gleaming as they lunge at smaller prey. Sharks, still primitive in form, dart through schools of jawless fishes that have not yet vanished from the stage. Lobe-finned fish swim with fins so thick and muscular they almost resemble limbs, while ray-finned relatives refine the elegant structures that will one day dominate modern oceans. Ammonoids coil their shells into spirals, drifting among reefs that rise like underwater citadels. But these reefs are not the coral cities we know. They are the work of stromatoporoid sponges and tabulate corals, building massive limestone structures that break waves and create lagoons. The Devonian reef belt stretched thousands of kilometers, rivaling anything alive today, and within it hid a menagerie of predators and prey, each carving a place in the food web. The record of those lives is written in stone and chemistry. Coprolites, the fossilized droppings of armored fish, still contain fragments of scales and bones, proof of their diets and predatory habits. Under the microscope, the fragments gleam with enamel, a hard mineral that resists time's erosion. Conodont elements, tooth-like microfossils left by small eel-like creatures, preserve subtle chemical signals. By measuring their isotopic ratios, geologists reconstruct the temperature and salinity of seas that vanished hundreds of millions of years ago. In some beds, these elements are darkened by burial and serve as geological thermometers, marking not just the lives of animals but the burial history of rocks themselves. While the oceans flourished, land was undergoing a quieter transformation. For the first time in Earth's history, forests rose. Lycopsids, horsetails, and early ferns colonized floodplains, their roots anchoring soil, their leaves spreading shade. Archaeopteris, a tree with fern-like leaves and woody trunks, reached heights of 10 meters or more, forming true forests. These trees dropped leaves seasonally, building thick mats of litter that decomposed into dark, carbon-rich soils. In those soils, chemistry changed. Carbon dioxide was drawn down, oxygen crept upward, and the atmosphere tilted toward something closer to what we breathe today. This was not a sudden revolution, but a steady rewriting of the planet's air. The Devonian forests created conditions that shaped every age that followed, and their legacy still lingers in the coal seams we mine today. Evidence of these forests lies at Nova Scotia, where upright fossilized trees are preserved in cliffs of shale and sandstone. Their roots spread through ancient soils, their trunks hollowed by time. Yet they stand as monuments to a green revolution that transformed the face of Earth. To walk among them now, as waves crash below, is to glimpse the Devonian not as an abstraction but as stone frozen mid-breath. Other sites reef limestones in Morocco, Devonian beds in Germany, and the high Arctic exposures of Ellesmere Island add scattered pages to this record, each one telling a fragment of the story. Among the most remarkable fossils is Tiktaalik, discovered on Ellesmere. Half fish, half tetrapod, it bridges the boundary between water and land. Its flat head, mobile neck, and sturdy fins suggest an animal that could prop itself in shallow water, peer above the surface, and push against mud. It was not yet a landwalker, but in its anatomy laid a blueprint for every amphibian, reptile, bird, and mammal to come. Tiktaalik's story is not simply about anatomy. It is about possibility, about the Earth opening new doors for life to test. The Devonian also bore tragedies. Reef systems collapsed in waves of extinction, linked to episodes of ocean anoxia sudden, losses of oxygen that suffocated marine life. Geochemical signatures in black shales reveal these crises: spikes in organic carbon, shifts in isotopic ratios, and layers of pyrite nodules. The silent mineral remains of vanished oxygen. Life rebounded, as it often does, but the pattern was clear. The Earth is not a museum preserving every experiment. It is an editor, revising constantly, deleting whole chapters before they can be read. Still, the Devonian was a time of extraordinary innovation. Insects appeared, small at first but laying the groundwork for later giants. The first seeds evolved, encapsulating new strategies for survival on land. Amphibians ventured onto floodplains, breathing air, navigating shallow waters, leaving trackways that hardened into stone. One such trackway, preserved in Poland, reveals footprints of a tetrapod walking long before reminding us that our fossil record is never complete. That discovery is as much about absence as presence. Forests left their own forensic traces. Growth rings in fossil would show seasonality, the alternation of wet and dry periods. In some trunks, insect borings and fungal etching mark ancient ecological interactions. In conodont beds, shifts in oxygen isotopes hint at climatic oscillations that stressed marine ecosystems. Together, these clues reveal a planet alive with change, a world constantly negotiating between flourishing and collapse. And yet, to imagine the Devonian as a place is to hear a silence unfamiliar to us. No birdsong filled the air, no mammal calls echoed in the forests. Vertebrates had not yet claimed the land fully. The air was stirred only by wind through trees, the rustle of giant ferns, the hum of insects just beginning their evolutionary ascent. It was a silence both eerie and expectant, the pause before a great unfolding. As the Devonian closed, the forests deepened, the seas shifted, and extinctions pruned the exuberant life of reefs. What endured was a legacy layered into stone. The forests drew down carbon, locking it in peat. Buried and compressed, that peat would become coal, the dark rock that would one day power steam engines and cities. In this way, the Devonian handed forward a gift, or perhaps a temptation, one that humans would seize millions of years later. The age of fishes was more than a chapter of armored predators and lobe-finned pioneers. It was the preparation of a world. It seeded forests, tested vertebrates on land, and altered the atmosphere. It gave us chemical whispers in conodonts, the bones of Tiktaalik, the trunks at Joggins, and the coal seams beneath our feet. It was an age that reached forward, writing legacies it could not foresee. And so the Devonian ends, its story pressed into reefs, coprolites, leaves, and stone. Its forests pass their inheritance to the Carboniferous, where swamps will thicken, oxygen will soar, and insects will grow to impossible sizes. Legacy line, the Devonian altered the air, reshaped the seas, and set the stage for life's expansion. Forward hook. The Carboniferous will inherit those forests and bury their power deep underground, in seams of coal that will one day ignite the engines of a future world. The Carboniferous period began more than 359 million years ago, inheriting from the Devonian its forests, its atmosphere, and its restless seas. Where the Devonian was a world of beginnings, plants learning to root, fish daring to rise, the Carboniferous was a world of abundance. It was lush, humid, and dark, with green canopies stretching across continents. Swamps swallowed floodplains, trees grew to impossible heights, and the air itself grew rich with oxygen. The earth, in this age, was a hothouse garden, extravagant and dangerous in equal measure. To stand within a Carboniferous forest would be to feel small. Towering lycopsids, some over 30 meters tall, rose like green pillars, their bark patterned with diamond-shaped scars where leaves once attached. Horsetails formed thickets, their stems segmented, their crowns feathered with fronds. Giant ferns spread their fronds in canopies, layered upon canopies, dimming the light below. Beneath them, seed ferns, smaller plants, and mosses carpeted the ground. The air was heavy with humidity, warm and oxygen. Fires, fueled by this surplus, could race through forests with terrifying speed. Yet the forests grew back relentlessly, building biomass at a scale no previous era had seen. In these swamps, peat accumulated. Plant matter fell into waterlogged soils, where decomposition slowed. Layer upon layer of organic debris compacted under its own weight. Over millions of years, these deposits transformed into coal-thick seams of black rock, sometimes stretching across entire regions. This was the geological gift of the Carboniferous, carbon locked away, preserved in darkness, awaiting futures it could not imagine. For now, it simply marked a planet shifting its balance, reducing carbon dioxide further, raising oxygen to levels more than a third higher than today. The legacy of this deep time sequence is layered. Each age carried forward gifts and scars. The Devonian forests prepared the air. The Carboniferous buried carbon in seams that humans would one day burn. The Permian taught the vulnerability of life to planetary convulsions. The Triassic revealed resilience and reinvention, the creativity of survival. The Jurassic proclaimed that new rulers had arrived, their reign to last more than 100 million years. Each period was both an ending and a beginning. Each extinction both a silence and an opening for innovation. Continuity is the thread that binds these stories. Though species perish, lineajes endure. Though lineages fail, ecosystems reinvent themselves. Though ecosystems collapse, life as a whole persists. The memory of Devonian seas survives in our bones, descended from lobe-finned fish. The breath of Carboniferous forests is in the oxygen we still inhale. The catastrophe of the Permian is a reminder written in every extinction curve. The resilience of the Triassic is echoed in each recovery. The ascendancy of the Jurassic is visible in the fossil bones of giants that still fascinate. Continuity is not permanence, is persistence through change. The passing of a flame through hands that always change, never lasting yet never extinguished philosophically. To trace this path is to feel both humility and wonder. Humility, because the rulers of each age thought eternal fish of the Devonian, amphibians of the Carboniferous, synapsids of the Permian, Rusukians of the Triassic were all replaced. Wonder, because at every collapse, life rebuilt, not as a copy, but as something new. The earth is not a keeper of memories in perfect order. It is a restless editor, erasing, revising, rewriting. But the continuity of life itself remains, a story always carried forward even when chapters are torn away. The early Jurassic was not the end of the story, but it was a threshold. Dinosaurs had seized their inheritance. Oceans were rich again, forests had returned, ecosystems were once more layered with predators and prey. It was a new equilibrium, fragile yet expansive, a stage set for the middle and late Jurassic giants. In their shadows, small synapsids scurried, ancestors of mammals biding their time. In their canopies, insects buzzed, pollinating cycles. In their seas, ammonites spiraled, ichthyosaurs dove, plesiosaurs wove through currents. It was a flourishing built upon extinctions, a continuity born of catastrophe. As we close this journey through deep time, from Devonian rivers to Jurassic seas, one truth rises: the earth is patient, life is persistent, and history is never secure. What was once dominant vanishes. What was once marginal endures. Forests fall and regrow, seas empty and refill, rulers rise and are erased. Yet always, the continuity of life threads forward, fragile yet unbroken, through extinctions and dawns alike. Legacy line, from the Devonian to the Jurassic. Life endured storms, silences, and extinctions, yet always carried its story forward. Closing reflection, we, too, are only a layer in this continuity, a brief experiment of deep time. One day our monuments will be gone, our cities erased, our names forgotten. What will remain is a chemical whisper in stone, another trace in Earth's memory. And in that continuity, we will join the forests, the ammonites, the dinosaurs, a single layer in the endless story of life. The result of that oxygen surplus was extraordinary. Insects and arthropods grew to giant proportions, their respiration enhanced by air richer than anything modern animals breathe. Dragonflies with wingspans the size of hawks hunted above the swamps. Millipedes longer than humans crawled through leaf litter. Spiders and scorpions, the size of small dogs, prowled the undergrowth. To walk through a carboniferous forest was to enter a realm where invertebrates were sovereign, their bodies unbound by the limits that constrain them today. Vertebrates, too, flourished. Amphibians, descendants of Devonian pioneers, diversified into myriad forms. Some remained tied to water, their skins moist, their eggs fragile. Others ventured farther onto land, hunting among the ferns and returning to swamps to breed. Fossil trackways preserved in coal seem show their gait broad, sprawling limbs pressing into mud, tails dragging furrows behind them. In these prints lies the memory of animals moving cautiously across unstable ground, their bodies still testing the possibilities of life beyond water. Among them, reptiles appeared for the first time. With eggs encased in protective shells, they freed themselves from swamps. No longer bound to lay eggs in water, they could inhabit drier lands, expanding ecological frontiers. These early reptiles were small, lizard-like creatures, but their innovation was profound. The amniotic egg was a passport into the future, a technology written in biology that would carry vertebrates into deserts, mountains, and ultimately every corner of Earth. The record of this world is etched in stone. At Joggins, in Nova Scotia, cliffs reveal upright fossil trees rooted in ancient soils. Within some of these trunks, hollowed by time, fossils of early reptiles have been found, creatures entombed in the very forests that nurtured them. The site is a layered chronicle, roots splaying outward, soil horizons preserved, tree trunks still standing, animals caught within. In Illinois, at Mazan Creek, concretions split open to reveal exquisitely preserved fossils, ferns, with every leaflet detailed, insects with delicate wings intact, fish frozen mid. These fossils are so complete that they seem less like remnants than like photographs captured in stone. In the coal measures of the United Kingdom, seams cut by miners once revealed trackways of amphibians and reptiles, their prints pressed into mud that hardened into shale. Growth rings in fossil would show seasonality, years of drought and flood, the climate cycles of a world so long gone. In these deposits, forensic details abound. Coprolites reveal fragments of insect exoskeletons, evidence of ancient diets. Bones bear tooth marks, signs of predation. Shells show etching from acidic waters, hinting at changing chemistry. Even the chemistry of coal itself records history: sulfur content rising and falling with sea level, trace metals marking volcanic ash falls. Each fragment is a data point, and together they reveal a planet both familiar and alien, yet abundance carried fragility. The very swamps that created coal were vulnerable to shifts in sea level and climate. As continents drifted, mountains rose, and climates cooled, forests sometimes collapsed. In some regions, the lush coal forests dwindled, replaced by drier woodlands and deserts. The earth, as always, edited ruthlessly, pruning even its most exuberant creations. Extinctions swept through amphibians, reshaping ecosystems, clearing the way for reptiles to rise. Still, the Carboniferous was an age of giants, both plant and animal, and its mark endures in the strata of countenance. The coal seams that fueled the industrial revolutions in Britain, in the Appalachians, in China, were born in these swamps. The energy of forests long vanished, trapped under pressure, lay dormant until humans unearthed it, releasing in centuries what nature had buried in millions of years. In this way, the Carboniferous is not only a chapter of prehistory, but a direct actor in our own story. Its forests burn again in our furnaces and engines, reshaping the atmosphere as they once did when alive. The image of a Carboniferous forest, humid and crowded, layered with canopies and shadows, reminds us how alien the past can be. To walk there would be to feel dwarfed by trees patterned with strange bark, to swat away dragonflies with wings like kites, to tread cautiously as giant amphibians stirred in black waters. The air would be thick with moisture and oxygen, the ground soft with peat. Lightning would ignite fires that raced upward through ferns, and when the flames passed, shoots would sprout again, relentless. It was a world both lush and perilous, extravagant and precarious, a planet flexing its powers of creation and erasure. At its close, the Carboniferous yielded to new climates. Swamps shrank, deserts spread, and the lush forests retreated. The stage was set for the Permian, an age where reptiles would diversify, where synapsids ancestors of mammals would rise, and where the Earth would face its greatest extinction. Legacy line. The Carboniferous built forests that reached for the sky, locked away carbon in black seams, and gave rise to giants that walked, crawled, and flew, forward hook. In the Permian, those giants would yield to reptiles and synapsids, and the world would march toward its greatest trial, the extinction that nearly erased life itself. The end of the Carboniferous was not a sudden collapse, but a slow turning, a change written first in forests and then in stone. For millions of years, vast swamps had carpeted the lowlands, drawing down carbon, storing it in peat, building the thick seams of coal that would one day fuel our own age. But by the late Carboniferous, those swamps faltered, the climate shifted, seas retreated, mountains rose as continents collided, and the humid lowlands gave way to more arid landscapes. The world that had been green and wet became patchier, drier, and tinged with red dust. It was the prelude to the Permiana world, where reptiles and their kin would thrive in new, harsher environments. To step into this transition is to notice first the forest's thinning. The giant lycopsids, once towering over swamp waters, began to dwindle. Their life cycles, dependent on flooded soils, could not withstand the drying. Ferns and seed ferns endured, but the balance shifted. Gymnosperms plants with seeds enclosed in protective coverings sexpanded, their resilience giving them an edge in drier climates. Trees like chordates spread across uplands, their long strap-like leaves reaching toward the sun. Conifers appeared, their seeds armored against desiccation, their needles conserving water. With them came the beginnings of more stable terrestrial ecosystems. Forests that could hold ground even when rains failed. The coal measures record this change. In late Carboniferous deposits, thick seams of black coal are interrupted by red beds of sandstone and siltstone. These red layers, stained by iron oxides, speak of aridity, of soils exposed to air, of rivers running shallow under hot suns. In the stratigraphy, the alternation is stark. Black coal seams, then red sandstones, then coal again, as the climate oscillated before finally tipping into dryness. Geologists call this the Carboniferous rainforest collapse, a phrase that condenses into words what took millions of years to unfold. In essence, the great humid forests fragmented into isolated patches, shrinking into refuges while deserts spread between them. The animals that lived through this transition tell their own story. Amphibians, once diverse in swampy habitats, suffered declines. Their moist skins and water-bound eggs tied them to wetlands, and as those wetlands vanished, so too did many of their lineages. In their place, reptiles advanced. The innovation of the amniotic eggs, self-contained, protected by a shell, equipped with its own supply of nutrient-sloughed reptiles to colonize uplands, plains, and deserts. Freed from swamps, they radiated outward, exploring niches closed to amphibians. Small lizard-like reptiles scuttled among the conifers, while larger synapsids ancestors of mammals took their first steps into prominence. Among these early synapsids was a predator whose long sail of spines rose above its back like a fin on land. Though it would thrive in the Permian, its lineage began in this transitional world. The sail may have served to regulate temperature, capturing morning sun or shedding heat in the afternoon. Whatever its function, it was a visible sign of innovation, of bodies adapting to climates that tested old designs. Herbivorous relatives such as Edaphosaurus also carried sails, though their diets were drawn from plants, not prey. The diversity of synapsids in this time is evidence of evolutionary opportunity, while amphibians receded. Reptiles and their kin multiplied. The forensic record of this shift is rich. In Texas and Oklahoma, red beds preserve the bones of synapsids, their skeletons entombed in floodplains where rivers once meandered. Tooth marks on bones reveal predation, jaws locking into prey, leaving scratches that hardened into fossil testimony. Burrows dug into sediments, now infilled and preserved, show animals taking refuge from heat or predators. In the Kuru Basin of South Africa, layers document the transition in exquisite detail, capturing both the flourishing of synapsids and the eventual approach of catastrophe. Bone beds, where dozens of skeletons are found together, tell of droughts and mass deaths, moments when life crowded into dwindling waterholes and perished as the climate failed them. The atmosphere itself was in flux. The high oxygen levels of the Carboniferous declined as forests waned and fires consumed biomass. Insects, once grown to giant sizes under oxygen-rich skies, shrank. Dragonflies no longer spanned half a meter. Millipedes no longer reached human length. The shrinking of giants was not sudden, but in the fossil record it is visible. Wing venation patterns change, body sizes contract, and the once extravagant arthropods become more modest. Life was responding to a new equilibrium, to an atmosphere less indulgent, more exacting. Geologically. The continents were on the move, toward assembly. By the end of the Carboniferous, most of the world's land masses had gathered into the supercontinent Pangaea. This vast land, stretching from pole to pole, altered climates on a global scale. Interior regions became dry, their distance from oceans cutting off moisture. Monsoons swept across coasts, but inland deserts expanded. The very shape of the world conspired to create aridity, a trend that would dominate the Permian. The red beds that appear across Pangaea's interior are more than colored stone. They are signatures of a world turning dry. The cultural memory of humanity does not extend back here. But if it did, the image of this transition would be one of contrasts. In one valley, lush swamps clung to existence, amphibians croaking in shaded pools, insects still rising on broad wings. In the next, red dust blew across bare plains, reptiles basked under unrelenting suns, and synapsids prowled with sails raised. It was a world of patchwork, of ecosystems fragmented, of species tested. Those that could adapt endured. Those that could not slipped quietly into extinction. Even in this harshness, innovation thrived. Growth rings in fossil would show adaptation to seasonality trees, adjusting growth to cycles of wet and dry. Trackways etched into sandstone reveal reptiles striding more confidently than amphibians, their tails no longer dragging so deeply. Coprolites of synapsids contain bone fragments, showing carnivory refined. Chemical analysis of sediments reveals fluctuations in carbon isotopes, hints of shifting atmospheric balance. The record is not uniform. It is jagged, uneven, yet unmistakable. Life was leaving behind the humid abundance of the Carboniferous and stepping into the stern trials of the Permian. The story of this transition is not just biological, but planetary. Earth itself was moving toward extremes. In deep time, climate is not a background, but a player, shaping and reshaping the possibilities of life. The late Carboniferous to early Permian was one such moment. When continents gathered, climates dried, oxygen fell, and the rules of survival changed. Amphibians that had thrived in swamps gave way to reptiles that could stride across deserts. Giant insects ceded to smaller forms. Coal forests retreated, leaving behind seams of black rock as memorials to their abundance. Synapsids rose, foreshadowing mammalian futures. Each change was written into stone, into bone, into chemistry, into the very shape of the continents, and yet, even as life adapted, a darker horizon loomed. The Permian would bring with it the greatest extinction Earth has ever known. The seeds of that catastrophe lay already in the geology and volcanism brewing, in continents colliding, in ecosystems stretched thin. For now, the late Carboniferous and early Permian offered opportunity, innovation, and expansion. But deep time has its rhythm, and it is often cruel. The very adaptations that gave life an edge here would be tested almost to breaking in what was to come. Legacy line, the transition from Carboniferous swamps to Permian deserts reshaped life's possibilities, pruning amphibians, shrinking giants, and giving reptiles and synapsids their foothold. Forward hook, the Permian will take that foothold and raise it into dominance. But it will also test life with the greatest extinction in Earth's history, a trial that few would survive. The Permian period opened like a continent drawing a deep breath. By this time, just over 290 million years ago, the great land masses of Earth had assembled into a single giant, Pangaea. It stretched almost pole to pole, an immense continent of deserts, mountains, rivers, and basins. Its coasts bore humid lowlands, but its interior lay parched, locked away from oceanic moisture. Red sandstones, salt flats, and dunes told of dryness. The Earth had moved decisively away from the humid swamps of the Carboniferous. What emerged instead was a harsher stage, but one that rewarded new players. This was the age when reptiles and their kin rose to prominence, spreading across environments that amphibians could no longer endure. The air itself had changed. Oxygen, once high, had fallen closer to modern levels. The atmosphere no longer sustained dragonflies with hawk-sized wings or millipedes meters long. The giants of the Carboniferous shrank back to modest proportions. Their brief reign ended. Amphibians, with their dependence on moist skin and water for reproduction, receded into wetlands and refuges. Their trackways became fewer in number, their bones rarer in sediments. In their place, reptiles advanced with confidence. The invention of the amniotic eggs, self-contained, shielded, and independent of water, proved decisive. Now vertebrates could hatch far from swamps, colonizing deserts, uplands, and forests with equal success. The diversity that bloomed in the Permian was astonishing. Early reptiles split into branches that would echo through deep time. The anapsids, with skulls lacking temporal openings, included creatures like Captohynus, small insectivores with multiple rows of teeth adapted for crushing. The diapsids, with 2 openings behind each eye socket, gave rise to lineages that would one day include lizards, snakes, crocodiles, and birds. But the most dramatic of all were the synapsids, with a single temporal opening that allowed stronger jaw muscles. This group, though reptilian in appearance, carried within it the ancestry of mammals. In the Permian, synapsids were kings. Among them walked Dimetrodon, the iconic predator of the red beds. Its back carried a tall sail of elongated neural spines, skin stretched between them like a fin on land. Theories differ. Was the sail a radiator to capture morning sun, to shed heat at noon, or a display to intimidate rivals. Whatever its function, it marked Dimetrodon as unmistakable, a silhouette that still fascinates. Fossil bones show conical teeth lined with serrations, ideal for slicing flesh. Coprolites attributed to Dimetrodon contain bone fragments, confirmation that it was carnivorous, preying on amphibians, reptiles, and anything smaller than itself. Not all synapsids were predators. Edaphosaurus, a plant-eater, also bore a sail but fed on the lush gymnosperm vegetation of Permian floodplains. Its teeth bore grinding surfaces, suited for tough plants. Growth rings in fossilized bones suggest seasonal stresses, periods when food was scarce. Burrows preserved in red beds may belong to small synapsids that sought refuge from heat or drought. These traces bring us close to their daily lives, digging for shade, enduring seasonal extremes, struggling through cycles of abundance and scarcity. The Karoo Basin of South Africa offers a vast record of Permian life. There, layer upon layer preserves synapsids in abundance. Small insect-eating forms, medium herbivores, massive predators, entire ecosystems frozen in stone. The diversity is staggering, enough that paleontologists coined names like gorgonopsids, fearsome predators with saber-like canines, and dacinodonts, tusked herbivores with beaked jaws. In Texas and Oklahoma, red beds reveal parallel stories, skeletons of Dimetrodon, Captohynus, and amphibians caught in drying floodplains. In Russia's Ural and Volga basins, fossils of parasaurs, heavily armored herbivores, speak of global diversity. Each site is a window into a time when reptiles and synapsids filled nearly every niche dot. Yet the Permian was not simply a triumphal march. It was a world of extremes, and its record is punctuated with hardship. Climate oscillated between humid intervals and arid stretches. Some sediments show growth rings tight and crowded, trees stunted by drought. Others show rapid expansion during wetter years. Bone beds sometimes preserve dozens of animals together, victims of sudden die-offs at water. Tooth marks on bones show predation. Etched shells reveal acidic waters. The forensic traces are many, each a fragment of a larger truth. Survival in the Permian was precarious. Still, innovation thrived. Reptiles refined their limbs for upright posture. Their tails lifted from the ground, their strides more efficient than their amphibian predecessors. Trackways in Permian sandstones show confident gaits, narrow and purposeful, a contrast to the sprawling shuffles of earlier growth rings in bones show rapid juvenile growth, followed by slower adulthood. A life strategy closer to modern reptiles and mammals. These are not minor details. They reveal physiology shifting, metabolism quickening, biology exploring new possibilities. Plants, too, adapted. Conifers expanded, their needle-like leaves conserving water, their seeds traveling farther. Glossopteryges broad-leaved seed, plants spread across Gondwana, their leaves preserved in South African and Indian rocks. Their forests stabilized soils, built ecosystems, and left behind impressions so detailed that vein patterns remain visible. These plants formed the basis of diets for herbivorous synapsids and insects alike. The cycle of life was robust, plants capturing carbon, herbivores feeding, predators hunting, decomposers breaking down waste, and rivers carrying it all into sediments that would preserve it for us. In museums today, Permian skeletons stand as if caught mid-stride. At the American Museum of Natural History, Dimetrodon arches its sail above visitors. In Cape Town, Decenodont fossils line cases with tusks gleaming. In Moscow, Parasaur skulls sit broad and armored, heavy with bone knobs. These are not just bones. They are voices from an age when reptiles rose and mammals' ancestors ruled the land. Their diversity was rich, their dominance clear, and yet beneath their success, the earth was preparing another turn. Pangaea's vastness created deserts that expanded like scars across its surface. Volcanism stirred, seas retreated. In the deep memory of stone, warning signs appear, isotopic shifts in carbon and oxygen, strange enrichments of metals, gaps in fossil records where once there was abundance. The Permian was building toward a climax, one that would not merely prune life but nearly erase it. For now, in this chapter, the story is one of rising power. Reptiles and synapsids inherited the earth. Amphibians lingered at the margins. But the future belonged to those who carried their young in amniotic eggs, who could stride across deserts, who dug burrows for shelter and grew sails for heat. Life had adapted to the new rules of a drier, harsher world. It had flourished. It had diversified. It had taken the gifts of the Carboniferous and remade them for survival in the Permian legacy line. The Permian crowned reptiles and synapsids as masters of land, their bodies tuned to aridity, their eggs freed from swamps, their diversity a new kind of resilience, forward hook, but resilience would be tested. Ahead lay the great dying, the end Permian extinction, the most severe trial life has ever faced, when even dominance could not guarantee survival. The story of the Permian begins with a rise. Reptiles spread across Pangaea, synapsids dominated ecosystems, conifers and glossopterad forests flourished. But the story does not end in triumph. It ends in silence. 252 million years ago, the Earth endured the most devastating extinction in its history. More than 90% of marine species vanished. On land, 70% of vertebrate families disappeared. Whole ecosystems collapsed, forests fell, oceans turned deadly. Paleontologists call it the end Permian extinction. But among them it carries another name, the Great Dying. To understand it, we must look not only at bones but at chemistry, not only at fossils but at the restless processes of the planet itself. In Siberia, vast eruptions tore open the crust, pouring lava across millions of square kilometers. The Siberian traps, as geologists call them, are today a plateau of basalt, but in the Permian they were fountains of fire, lasting hundreds of thousands of years. Lava alone would have been catastrophic, but the real damage came from gases. Carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur. Each eruption vented them in staggering quantities. The atmosphere thickened with greenhouse gases, oceans absorbed heat, climates destabilized. The rocks preserved this catastrophe with forensic clarity. Carbon isotopes in sediments show sharp negative excursions, sudden drops that mark vast releases of carbon into the system. Black shales rich in organic matter testify to oceans that lost their oxygen, suffocating marine life. Layers enriched in pyrite, formed in anoxic conditions, are interbedded with volcanic ash, a grim pairing of suffocation and fire. Even conodont fossils, those tiny tooth-like remnants, record heat and chemistry. Their color alteration index reveals ocean temperatures spiking to levels lethal for most life. In the seas, reefs collapsed. For millions of years, stromatoporoids and corals had built underwater cities. At the extinction boundary, they vanished. Trilobites, which had endured since the Cambrian, finally disappeared forever. Brachiopods, once abundant, dwindled to a fraction of their diversity. Gorgon-headed ammonoids spiraled into extinction, leaving only a few survivors to carry their lineage forward. The fossil record across continents shows the same pattern. Rich marine diversity suddenly replaced by impoverished faunas, often dominated by disaster species organisms able to tolerate low oxygen and high stress on land. The story was equally grim. The Karoo Basin, once home to a thriving menagerie of synapsids, records layer upon layer of losses. Dicynodonts, gorgonopsids, parasaurs all fell in numbers. Many vanished altogether. Bone beds, once full of diversity, become sparse, dominated by a few hardy survivors. Growth rings in fossil would show forests failing, tree lines retreating, leaves thinning. Glossopterode forests across Gondwana collapsed. In some layers, fossil pollen is reduced to fragments, as if entire plant communities withered in drought and heat. Forensic traces make the catastrophe tangible. Ash beds contain shocked minerals, evidence of volcanic intensity. Sediments show sudden shifts in sulfur isotopes, pointing to acid rains that scoured landscapes. Some soils are bleached of nutrients, their profiles truncated by erosion. Rivers carried not just water, but floods of dead vegetation, burying it in chaotic deposits. The world was not gently pruned. It was burned, drowned, poisoned, and smothered all at once. What did it feel like to live through the great dying? Imagine an amphibian clinging to the last shrinking pool as rivers dried. Imagine a dicynodont wandering across barren plains, its tusked beak searching for plants that no longer grew. Imagine a reef fish gasping in waters that grew hot and stagnant, each breath thinner than the last. Extinction is not an event that happens in a day. It is a grinding down of possibilities, a narrowing of choices. Until survival becomes a lottery, most cannot win. And yet, even in this darkness, some survived. Small burrowing synapsids endured, protected in their dens from the extremes above. A few lineages of archosaur reptiles weathered the storm, carrying the seeds of future crocodiles, pterosaurs, and dinosaurs. Insects, though reduced, adapted, finding niches among what remained. Plants diversified again, with conifers and seed ferns rebuilding after glossopterids fell. In survival lay the blueprint of the next age. The recovery, however, was slow. Unlike some extinctions, where ecosystems rebound in a few million years, the aftermath of the Permian lingered. For 5 million years, diversity remained low, Earth's ecosystems unstable. Geologists find repeated spikes of stress in sediments, pulses of anoxia, recurring climate swings. It was as if the Earth staggered, reeling from a blow so great that it could not quickly regain balance. For millions of years, the planet remembered its trauma. In museums today, Permian skeletons often stand beside signs explaining their fate, extinction. Visitors gaze at Dimetrodon and Edaphosaurus, at Dicynodont tusks and Parasaur skulls, and read that these creatures vanished at the Great Dying. Their bones are not just curiosities, they are memorials. Each fossil is both a record of life and a record of loss. A reminder that dominance in deep time is no shield against catastrophe. GEOLOGICALLY. The end Permian extinction is marked by missing layers where erosion or non-deposition erased chapters. In some regions, entire faunas vanish between one bed and the next. It is as if pages were torn from the Earth's book, leaving only silence. That silence is eloquent. It tells us that life, though resilient, is never permanent, and that Earth itself can shift the rules of survival overnight. Philosophically, the great dying is humbling. We like to think of extinction as rare, extraordinary, but deep time reveals that it is part of the planet's rhythm. The end Permian was simply the most extreme note in that rhythm, the deepest silence before a new chorus began. If more than 90% of species could vanish, what permanence can any lineage claim? Our own species, with all its cities and machines, will one day face the same truth. Dominance is temporary. Survival is conditional. The end Permian was not the end of the story, but a resetting of it. From its survivors, the Triassic world would emerge new reptiles, new plants, new ecosystems built from remnants. The great dying cleared the stage, erasing almost everything, but in the emptiness lay opportunity. What followed would be innovation on a grand scale. The Earth, after erasing, would rewrite. Legacy line, the great dying ended the age of synapsid's dominance, erased most of life, and scarred the Earth with silence. Forward hook from that silence. The Triassic would rise a world of recovery, of experiments, and of new lineages that would shape the next age of reptiles. The great dying had passed, but its shadow lingered. The Permian closed in silence, and when the Triassic dawned around 252 million years ago, the Earth was a wounded world. Oceans were barren, forests shattered, animals scarce. More than 9 of every 10 species had vanished, and what remained struggled in a climate hostile to life. The early Triassic was not a gentle recovery, but a crucible, unstable and unforgiving. Survival was possible, but fragile, and the pace of recovery was slow, hesitant, interrupted by setbacks. The continents were still joined in Pangaea, the supercontinent stretching vast and continuous, its interior scorched by desert sun. The Siberian traps continued to exhale gases long after their eruptions ended, keeping carbon dioxide levels high. Global temperatures soared. Geological proxies, oxygen isotopes in marine sediments, growth rings in fossil wood point to climates as hot as P-40 degrees Celsius in equatorial zones. Oceans warmed, their circulation faltered, and in many places waters stagnated, turning anoxic and toxic. Black shales rich in pyrite and organic matter bear witness to seas where oxygen was scarce and life suffocated. Marine ecosystems, once vibrant with trilobites, corals and ammonoids, had been stripped bare. In their place, a few hardy lineages endured. Bivalves and gastropods spread into niches once held by ammonoids rebounded quickly, diversifying into new forms, their coiled shells recording resilience in adversity. Small, opportunistic species proliferated, tolerant of low oxygen and high temperatures. For millions of years, these disaster taxa dominated, their abundance a reminder that ecosystems had been reduced to their simplest forms. On land, recovery was just as tentative. Glossopterod forests had collapsed, leaving barren soils and eroded landscapes. Fossil pollen records show plant diversity plummeting at the boundary and remaining low for several million years. Shrubby lycopsids and ferns became the dominant colonizers, hardy pioneers that grew quickly, spread widely, and withered in turn. Forests of stature returned slowly, only after climate stabilized. For long stretches of the early Triassic, landscapes were open, patchy, vulnerable to erosion. In some regions, layers of red sandstone and siltstone lie thick. recording floods that scoured treeless valleys. The animals that survived the Great Dying were few but adaptable. In the Karoo Basin of South Africa, paleontologists find fossils of Lystrosaurus, a dicenodont synapsid that became astonishingly abundant. Stocky, with tusks and a beaked mouth, it fed on roots and tough plants. Its skeleton appears in such numbers that in some sites, Lystrosaurus makes up more than 90% of vertebrate fossils. How did it endure when so many perished? Perhaps it was its burrowing habits, allowing refuge from heat and drought. Perhaps its physiology tolerated low oxygen levels. Whatever the cause, Lystrosaurus became the emblem of early Triassic survival, a creature plain in appearance but extraordinary in persistence. Other survivors included small amphibians, clinging to wetlands, and the first archosaurs, early relatives of crocodiles and dinosaurs. These archosaurs were modest in size, but their presence foreshadowed futures yet to come. In the early Triassic, they were merely experiments, thin threads in a tattered web of life. Later, they would flourish. For now, they endured. Forensic traces make the difficulty of recovery clear. Trackways in Triassic sandstones show sparse animal traffic, the prints of a few reptiles striding across open ground. Growth rings in fossil wood are narrow, irregular, signs of climatic stress and poor growth. Conodont fossils from marine sediments show repeated temperature spikes, their isotopic chemistry marking episodes of warming intense enough to suppress diversity again and again. Sediment layers reveal repeated pulses of anoxia, suggesting that even after the extinction, oceans remained unstable for millions of years. The Earth did not heal quickly. It staggered, and yet, slowly, recovery gathered momentum. Ammonoids diversified further, experimenting with shell shapes and buoyancy. Reptiles expanded, exploring niches as amphibians remained constrained. Insects rebounded, their wings once again filling the skies, though not to carboniferous proportions. Plants, after millions of years of low diversity, began to experiment anew, with gymnosperms conifers in particular gaining ground. Bit by bit, ecosystems reassembled themselves, though they bore little resemblance to what came before. The early Triassic world was strange. Deserts sprawled across Pangaea, their sands recording wind-scoured dunes. In these environments, reptiles left trackways crisscrossing ancient playa lakes. Rivers carried heavy loads of sediment from treeless uplands, depositing them in thick fans. Fossil burrows, preserved in cross-section, reveal animals hiding underground to escape the heat. Bone beds, often dominated by a single species like Lystrosaurus, testify to ecosystems lacking the balance of diversity. These were not rich forests or bustling reefs. They were sparse, tough, resilient communities clinging to existence in a hostile climate. To imagine life here is to picture survival, pared down to essentials, burrowing for safety, feeding on hardy plants, reproducing quickly before drought claimed another generation. It was an age when generalists thrived, specialists perished, and endurance was the highest currency. Evolution favored the adaptable, the opportunistic, the unremarkable in form but extraordinary in persistence. Philosophically, the early Triassic reminds us that recovery is not always swift or grand. After the Great Dying, life did not explode into abundance. It hesitated, stumbled, tried, and failed. For millions of years, the planet seemed reluctant to restore its richness. Ecosystems were fragile, extinctions continued in pulses, and diversity remained low. Yet through patience and persistence, life rebuilt itself. That lesson is humbling. Resilience is not about instant triumph, but about enduring through long difficulty, finding footholds where none seem possible. By the end of the early Triassic, signs of renewal were undeniable. New lineages of reptiles diversified. Archosaurs began to carve niches that would one day expand into dominance. Ammonoids flourished in seas that had once been empty. Conifers began to re-establish forests on land. The Earth, though scarred, was turning the page. The silence of the Permian had not been permanent. From heat, drought, and anoxia, life emerged again. Fragile at first, then stronger, it prepared the ground for the Middle Triassic world of recovery proper, where ecosystems grew in complexity, predators sharpened their teeth, and the first outlines of the age of reptiles came into view. Legacy line. The early Triassic was survival in its barest form, a time of heat, deserts, and sparse communities where only the hardy endured. Forward hook, the Middle Triassic would build upon that endurance, fostering recovery, innovation, and the rise of new predators that would define the reptilian age to come. The early Triassic had been a world of survival, deserts stretching across shallow seas struggling for oxygen, and ecosystems reduced to their simplest forms. But by the time the Middle Triassic dawned around 247 million years ago, Earth had begun to breathe again. Recovery, though slow and halting, was no longer merely survival, it was renewal. Life that had clung to existence in the Great Dying now expanded, tested new forms, and laid the foundations for futures that would define the rest of the Mesozoic. The silence was giving way to voices again, and the chorus was distinctly reptilian. Across the continents, reptiles diversified. Archosaurs, a group of diapsid reptiles, spread into roles once filled by some were crocodile-like, prowling rivers and coasts. Others grew long-limbed, with bodies built for running. The early outlines of dinosaurs could be glimpsed in these experiments, though true dinosaurs were still to come. The Middle Triassic was a laboratory of evolution, a time of trial runs and innovations, of body plans being tested against climate that had stabilized but remained unpredictable. The seas, too, recovered. Coral-like organisms reappeared, building reefs after millions of years of absence. These were not the same reef builders of the Devonian, nor the exact corals of today, but a new community, scleractinian corals, joined by sponges and algae, creating patch reefs that spread across warm shallows. Around them swam ammonoids, which had rebounded dramatically from the Great Dying, evolving shell shapes and sizes in dazzling variety. Their coiled whorls, preserved in limestone, mark the resilience of a lineage that had nearly been extinguished. Ichthyosaurs, ripitals that returned to the sea, glided through deeper waters, streamlined like dolphins, their eyes enormous, adapted to dim light, from a land stripped bare only a few million years before. The oceans once again held complexity, color, and life. The Karoo Basin in South Africa records this renewal, where earlier layers held only Lystrosaurus. Middle Triassic beds preserve a greater diversity. Archosaurs, amphibians, dicynodonts, and predators like Synagnathus, a synapsid with powerful jaws. In Argentina's Istiguasto Basin, sediments capture some of the earliest archosaurs experimenting with upright posture, their trackways narrow and efficient. In Europe, the Monte San Giorgio site reveals a treasure trove of marine live fish, ichthyosaurs, nothosaurs, and marine reptiles preserved in exquisite detail. These places are not just fossil localities. They are time capsules of recovery, reminders that life, though staggered, does not remain down forever. Forensic details reveal the process of healing. In fossilized wood, growth rings widen, evidence of climate stabilizing enough to allow steady forest growth. In marine sediments, carbon isotopes show oscillations calming, oxygen levels recovering, permitting more complex food webs. Trackways in Triassic sandstones become more frequent and varied, the prints of archosaurs striding confidently across floodplains, their tails lifted, their gaits upright. Coprolites contain bone fragments and scales, evidence of predators once again hunting diverse prey, where the early Triassic was dominated by a few hardy forms. The Middle Triassic reveals ecosystems branching outward, niches filling, interactions multiplying. Still, the world bore scars. Diversity was not yet what it had been in the Permian. Forests were thinner, with conifers and cycads beginning to take dominance. Glossop the ruds, once widespread, had vanished. On land, synapsids remained but were no longer sovereign. The torch was passing to reptiles. The synapsid Synagnethus, though formidable, was only one of a dwindling group. Its descendants would one day become mammals, but in the Triassic they shared the world uneasily with rising archosaurs. The balance was shifting, and the future belonged not to the mammal line, but to the reptilian one. Marine life told a similar story. Trilobites were gone forever. Brachiopods reduced, but bivalves and ammonoids expanded. New predators appeared: marine reptiles with long necks, sharp teeth, and bodies adapted for pursuit. Some swam with undulating tails, others with flippers like modern seals. Fossil stomach contents reveal fish scales and ammonoid shells, prey consumed in vanished seas. In Monte San Giorgio, pregnant ichthyosaurs are preserved with embryos inside, proof that these reptiles gave live birth in water, an innovation that freed them entirely from land. Evolution was not simply repeating old forms. It was inventing new strategies. The landscapes of the Middle Triassic were striking. Along coasts, patch reefs grew, alive with corals, sponges, and fish. Inland, conifer forests spread across floodplains, cycads rising like stiff green sentinels. Deserts still stretched across Pangaea's heart, but rivers cut through them, supporting oases where reptiles thrived. In these settings, archosaurs grew diversum, adapted to hunt in water, others to run on open plains. Their bones show lightweight construction, elongated limbs, and in some cases, bipedal movement. It was a foreshadowing of dinosaurs, though the true age of dinosaurs had not yet begun. Philosophically, the Middle Triassic is a reminder that recovery is not just about restoring what was lost, but about creating anew. The ecosystems that returned were not the same as those erased in the Permian. They were different, built on survivors, shaped by new innovations. The past could not be rebuilt. Instead, life wrote a new chapter, with new characters and new themes. That is the nature of resilience in deep time, not restoration, but reinvention. The fossils whisper this truth in every detail. A nothosaur jaw, sharp and curved, tells of hunting styles unknown before. A trackway pressed into sandstone reveals a gait more upright, more efficient than earlier reptiles. An ammonoid shell, spiraled yet subtly altered, speaks of experimentation. A fossilized tree trunk, with growth rings evenly spaced, signals stability regained. Each trace is a note in the melody of recovery, a melody that had been silenced but now played again, cautious at first, then stronger by the close of the Middle Triassic. Ecosystems had grown more complex. Archosaurs were diverse and spreading. Synapsids remained, but their dominance was slipping. Marine reptiles flourished, ammonoids multiplied, reefs rebuilt. Plants re-established forests, insects diversified, food webs expanded. The scars of the Great Dying had not vanished, but life had moved beyond survival into innovation, and looming ahead was the late Triassic, when these innovations would converge into something extraordinary, the first true dinosaurs, the rise of pterosaurs in the skies, and the continued spread of reptiles into every niche. The Middle Triassic was not the climax, but the overture, the gathering of instruments before the symphony of the Mesozoic began in full. Legacy line: the Middle Triassic rebuilt what the Great Dying had destroyed, not as a copy of the past, but as a new creation, with reptiles, reefs, and innovation leading the way. Forward hook: the late Triassic would take these beginnings and transform them into revolutions, the first dinosaurs on land, the first pterosaurs in the air, and the dawn of a new dominance that would last for over 100 million years. By the late Triassic, around 230 million years ago, the Earth was no longer merely recovering, it was reinventing itself. The silence of the early Triassic had given way to the cautious expansion of the Middle Triassic, and now the tempo quickened. Ecosystems were richer, predators sharper, prey more diverse. Forests of conifers and cycads spread across floodplains, deserts alternated with lush river valleys, and the seas swarmed with ammonoids and marine reptiles. It was into this vibrant yet volatile world that the first dinosaurs appeared, small and unassuming, but carrying within them the blueprint of an age. Pangaea still stretched unbroken, and its vastness shaped the climate. Along coasts, monsoons brought rains that nourished forests and floodplains. Inland, deserts remained, their dunes recording the paths of reptiles and insects in delicate impressions. Volcanic ranges cut the horizon. Rivers meandered across basins, and in South America, particularly in the Istiguasto and Los Colorados formations of Argentina. Sediments captured the tracks and bones of the first true dinosaurs. These earliest dinosaurs were not giants. They were small to medium-sized creatures, lightly built, agile, their bones hollow and limbs elongated. Eoraptor, one of the earliest known, was no larger than a dog. With slender teeth suited for a varied diet, it was a generalist, a pioneer experimenting with form. Heterathaurus, larger and more formidable, stood on two legs, its jaws lined with sharp teeth, its forelimbs clawed for grasping. In its sleek frame and predatory build, we see the outline of later theropods, the lineage that would culminate in the great carnivores of the Jurassic and Cretaceous. But dinosaurs were not alone. They shared their world with a caste of archosaurs, their broader reptilian kin. Crocodile-like phytosaurs lurked in rivers, their elongated jaws snapping at fish. Rhesuchians, massive land predators with upright stances, prowled floodplains, their teeth rivaling those of later tyrannosaurs. Etosaurians, armored herbivores with broad bodies and plated backs, shuffled through forests, feeding on low plants. The late Triassic was not a world dominated by dinosaurs. It was a world of experiments, of many lineages competing, of evolutionary options branching outward. Dinosaurs were only one thread, and at first not even the thickest. Marine ecosystems mirrored this diversity. Ichthyosaurs sped through open waters, their streamlined bodies and enormous eyes adapted for deep dives. Nothosaurs and placodonts hunted in coastal shallows, some with crushing teeth for cracking shells. Ammonoids flourished in bewildering variety, their shells spiraled and ornamented with ridges, nodes, and spines. Coral reefs, though smaller than those of later eras, hosted fish, invertebrates, and reptiles in vibrant communities. The oceans, devastated at the end of the Permian, now pulsed with life, a reminder of resilience on a planetary scale. Forensic evidence tells us much about this time of competition and change. Trackways preserved in sandstone reveal variegated, bipedal stride surly dinosaurs running across floodplains, their tails held aloft, their steps quick and balanced. Other trackways, broader and heavier, mark the presence of Ruskians and Etosaurs, their weight pressing deeply into the mud. Coprolites yield fragments of bone, scales, and plant tissue, linking predators to prey, herbivores to plants. In growth rings of fossil wood, climates reveal themselves, years of abundance alternating with years of stress. Forests growing in cycles shaped by monsoons. Each trace is a glimpse into a world in flux, its inhabitants adapting to instability. The geology of the late Triassic also foreshadows the drama to come. Rift valleys opened as Pangaea began to stretch and crack. Volcanism marked these rifts, hinting at the tectonic forces that would eventually split the supercontinent. The central Atlantic magmatic province camp was stirring, though its cataclysmic eruptions would not come until the very end of the Triassic. For now, the Earth simmered quietly, its surface recording stress in lava flows and fissures. Beneath the apparent stability of vibrant ecosystems, the planet prepared another test. In this setting, dinosaurs slowly carved their place. Their skeletons reveal lightweight construction, pneumatic bones, and adaptations for upright posture. Their hips allowed efficient, narrow-gated strides. Their metabolism may have been elevated compared to other reptiles, allowing faster movement, greater endurance. They were not yet dominant, but they were efficient, adaptable, and persistent. While Ruzukians ruled as apex predators, and Etosaurs armored themselves against attack, dinosaurs survived by versatility. They filled niches that others overlooked. They ran swiftly, hunted opportunistically, and reproduced effectively. In evolution, persistence often matters more than prominence. Philosophically, the appearance of dinosaurs in the late Triassic reminds us that greatness rarely begins in grandeur. They did not stride onto the stage as titans. They arrived as small actors in a crowded cast, overshadowed by Rusukians and Phytosaurs. Their success was not immediate, but patient, building across generations, exploiting openings left by extinctions and ecological shifts. It is a lesson written repeatedly in deep time. Survival belongs not always to the biggest or fiercest, but to the adaptable, the enduring, the ready to seize opportunity. When the world changes by the end of the late Triassic, change was coming. The central Atlantic magmatic province erupted in pulses of unimaginable scale. Lava poured across rift valleys, gases filled the sky, and climates lurched into chaos. Extinctions followed, pruning lineages of archosaurs and clearing ecological space. Rusukians once dominant vanished. Phytosaurs so abundant declined. Etosaurs disappeared. Dinosaurs, by chance or by design, survived. Their persistence through this bottleneck ensured that when the dust settled, they would inherit the Earth. The fossils capture this turning point with abruptness. In one layer, Roasukian bones dominate. In the next, they are gone. Trackways shift from heavy, sprawling forms to narrow, bipedal strides. Ammonoid diversity plummets, then rebounds with new forms. Plant pollen records show forests disrupted, reshaped by fire and climate change. It is a reminder that history is often written in thresholds, moments when one world ends and another begins. The late Triassic closed not in quiet but in upheaval, a cataclysm that erased rivals and left dinosaurs poised to rise. In their small, agile bodies lay the potential for giants. In their survival lay the promise of dominance. The age of reptiles was no longer an experiment. It was becoming destiny. Legacy line. The late Triassic saw dinosaurs emerge as modest players in a crowded world of reptiles. But it ended with an extinction that left them the heirs of Earth. Forward hook. The early Jurassic would open with their triumph, the dawn of dinosaurs as rulers of land, as pterosaurs took to the skies, and as ecosystems grew into the grand stage of the Mesozoic. The late Triassic world was alive with experiments. Rhesuchians stalked floodplains on upright limbs, their skulls massive, their teeth curved and serrated. Phytosaurs lurked in rivers, armored bodies sliding beneath the surface, jaws snapping at anything that crossed their path. Armored etosaurs browsed low vegetation, their backs bristling with bony plates. Dinosaurs, small and agile, were there too fleet-footed hunters and nimble omnivores, but they were not yet the rulers of the earth. The stage was crowded, and dominance was contested. Then, as the Triassic drew to its close, some 201 million years ago, the Earth shifted again. In an interval geologists measure in hundreds of thousands of years, brief by the scale of deep time, the planet underwent another great extinction. The Triassic-Jurassic boundary marked not only the end of rival reptile dynasties, but the beginning of the dinosaurs. Supremacy, the trigger lay deep within the earth, as Pangaea began to split. Vast rift valleys opened across what is now the Atlantic. The crust fractured, magma surged upward, and the largest volcanic province of the last half-billion years was unleashed, the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, or CAMP, for perhaps 500,000 years. Eruptions pulsed across what is now North America, South America, Africa, and Europe. Lava flows stretched for thousands of kilometers. Fissures vented carbon dioxide and sulfur gases in volumes that altered climate, chemistry, and life itself. The rocks record this planetary convulsion. Basalts, stacked in layers hundreds of meters thick, still line valleys from Nova Scotia to Morocco. Between them lie sedimentary layers rich in fossils, plants, insects, reptiles suddenly in these strata, geologists find abrupt shifts in carbon isotopes, signals of greenhouse gases flooding the atmosphere. Oxygen isotopes in marine sediments point to rapid warming, seas turning hot and unstable. Thin layers of soot preserved in some deposits hint at global wildfires, forests igniting as climates lurched. It was not a single eruption, not a day or a year, but repeated pulses of volcanism, each one stressing ecosystems until they broke. Marine life felt the shock first. Ammonoids, once so diverse, crashed in numbers. Coral reefs withered. Bivalves and gastropods survived better, but diversity thinned. Conodonts, those tooth-like fossils that had once been guides through Paleozoic oceans, finally vanished altogether. Black shales laid down in oxic basins, tell of seas starved of oxygen where only bacteria thrived. The oceans, already fragile since the Great Dying, reeled again under the weight of volcanism and warming. On land, the extinction was equally severe. Rhesuchians, apex predators, for tens of millions of years, disappeared. Their skeletons vanish from the record abruptly, leaving only silence where their heavy tracks once pressed into floodplains. Etosaurs, those armored browsers, fell as well. Their bony plates left scattered in sediments, but no new forms to replace them. Phytosaurs, once abundant in rivers worldwide, died out completely. Insects suffered losses, with some lineages reduced or pruned. Plant pollen records show turnovers, forests disrupted, gymnosperms faltering in some regions as climates destabilized. And yet, amid the losses, one group endured and rose: the dinosaurs. Their small, lightly built bodies, efficient posture, and perhaps elevated metabolism gave them resilience. They had never dominated the Triassic, but when their rivals vanished, they were poised to expand. Trackways in late Triassic rocks give way, at the boundary, to a proliferation of dinosaur prince theropods striding across floodplains, early sauropodomorphs leaving long trails of four-toed impressions. The transition is stark. A world once ruled by many reptile lineages, suddenly dominated by one. The forensic details of this turnover are striking. At sites in Morocco, Rhesuchian bones end just below lava flows, while dinosaur bones appear just above. In Britain's fissure deposits, Triassic reptiles disappear at the boundary, replaced by early Jurassic dinosaurs. In the Newark Basin of North America, cores drilled through basalt layers revealed pollen assemblages shifting abruptly, conifers retreating, ferns spiking in dominance before forests reassembled. These fern spikes are ecological signatures of collapse, opportunistic plants flourishing in disturbed landscapes. They mark the aftermath of catastrophe in green dust. To imagine the Triassic-Jurassic extinction is to picture a world in upheaval. Skies hazed with volcanic gases, climates swinging between searing heat and sudden cooling, rains acidified by sulfur, forests burning in waves. Rivers ran with sediment from denuded slopes. Animals died in droughts, in floods, in poisoned waters. Ecosystems contracted, simplified, and then shifted irreversibly. Where once phytosaurs lurked, only silence. Where Rhesuchians roared, only the rising cries of small theropods. Extinction is not only loss, it is the opening of space, the clearing of ecological room. Into that room dinosaurs stepped, tentative at first, then with momentum that would carry them through the next 135 million years. Philosophically, this extinction is a reminder of the strange balance of chance and resilience in deep time. Rhesuchians were powerful, but their specializations bound them tightly to the environments that failed. Dinosaurs, less dominant, survived because they were adaptable, filling niches others left open. The lesson echoes beyond prehistory. It is not always the strongest who endure, but the flexible, the quick to adjust when the world shifts beneath them. By the end of the extinction, the Triassic was gone, its strange experiments erased. In its place, the Jurassic opened a world greener, wetter, more stable, where dinosaurs would grow large and diverse, where pterosaurs would claim the skies, and where marine reptiles would dominate the seas. The stage had been cleared, and the actors were ready. The age of dinosaurs was no longer a promise. It had begun, legacy line. The Triassic closed with fire and silence, erasing rivals and reshaping ecosystems. Forward hook, the early Jurassic would inherit this cleared stage, and from it would rise the grand flourishing of dinosaurs, the giants of land and sea that would define the Mesozoic world. The boundary between the Triassic and the Jurassic was written in fire. The Central Atlantic magmatic province had torn Pangaea with eruptions that poured lava across continents, filled skies with gases, and poisoned oceans. Rivals of the dinosaurs, the Rhesuchians, phytosaurs, etosaurs, were erased. The earth had been cleared violently, and what remained was an open stage. Into that emptiness stepped the survivors, and among them the dinosaurs found their moment. The early Jurassic, beginning around 201 million years ago, was their dawn, the first act of their long reign. At first, they were not giants. The earliest Jurassic dinosaurs were still lean and modest, creatures little larger than humans or horses. Yet their skeletons carried advantages: hollow bones lightening their frames, hips that allowed upright strides, metabolisms that may have been swifter than other reptiles. They could move farther, run faster, endure longer. Trackways in early Jurassic sandstones, such as those found at the Blue Lias cliffs of southern England, caught their narrow gaits, tails lifted, strides confident. These prints, frozen in tidal flats, are among the earliest signatures of a world newly ruled by dinosaurs. Forests were spreading again. After the ecological chaos of the extinction, conifers re-established their dominance. Cycads and ginkgos rose in groves, their stiff leaves forming ancient canopies. Ferns carpeted the understory, and horsetails clustered near rivers. Fossilized wood from Yunnan in China and Lyme Regis in England shows broad growth rings, signs of climates stabilizing after the volcanic spasms of the Triasic's end. Pollen records tell the same story: diversity returning, plants reclaiming land. With forests came soil, with soil came rivers running clearer, and with rivers came a renewal of floodplain ecosystems. Dinosaurs spread into these environments with remarkable speed. Sauropodomorphs, long-necked herbivores, grew larger than their Triassic ancestors. Massospondylus in South Africa and Plateosaurus in Europe stretched several meters in length, feeding high on conifer branches, leaving trackways of heavy four-footed strides. They were not yet the titans of the later Jurassic, but they foreshadowed them, their elongated necks and robust bodies hinting at the giants to come. Theropods, their carnivorous kin, expanded as well. Sleek hunters like Dilophosaurus prowled floodplains, their skulls adorned with twin crests. Their teeth, serrated and curved, left marks on bones that survive as silent testimony of their hunts. Coprolites from theropods reveal fragments of bone and scales, proof of predation across a range of prey. Marine life flourished alongside these terrestrial experiments. Ammonites, reduced by the extinction, exploded into diversity. Their coiled shells preserved in layers of limestone across Europe and Asia. They became so abundant and widespread that paleontologists use them today to mark stages of Jurassic time. Ichthyosaurs thrived, sleek as dolphins, giving live birth at sea. Plesiosaurs appeared, their long necks and paddle-like limbs cutting through shallow waters. Fossil beds in Lyme Regis, preserved in the Blue Lias Formation, capture this marine abundance. Ammonites spiraled in stone. Ichthyosaur skeletons preserved with embryos inside. Marine reptiles caught in mudslides that buried them intact. The seas, scarred by extinction, were vibrant again. The forensic details of recovery tell us how thoroughly the Earth had shifted. Geochemical analyses of marine sediments show oxygen levels returning, black shales giving way to lighter limestones as seas regained health. Isotopic ratios of carbon stabilize, reflecting ecosystems once more balanced. Growth rings in fossil bones of sauropodomorphs reveal rapid growth rates. suggesting metabolisms adapted for quick maturity, a strategy that fueled population expansion. Dinosaur track sites multiply across continents in Lesotho, in Poland, in China, evidence of their global spread. Each detail is a data point, and together they mark the ascent of a new ruling class. Yet the early Jurassic was not without tension. Though dinosaurs expanded, other reptiles persisted. Crocodilomorphs shared floodplains, some small and lithe, others larger and Synapsids, though diminished, survived in modest forms, the distant ancestors of mammals, continuing their quiet thread. Insects buzzed through forests, pollinating plants, feeding reptiles and early mammalia forms alike. Ecosystems were richer than in the Triassic, but they were not yet the lush symphonies of the Middle and Late Jurassic. The early Jurassic was still a time of rebuilding, but the momentum was unstoppable. Philosophically, this dawn is instructive. Dinosaurs did not rise as inevitable rulers. They survived a crisis by chance and adaptability, then seized opportunity when the Earth reset. Their success is a story of resilience, of patience rewarded by timing. It reminds us that history is not always linear or fair. Survivors are not always the most powerful, but the most suited to change. In this sense, the early Jurassic is less a triumphal march than a lesson in contingency. If the eruptions of Camp had been less severe, Rusukians might have endured, and dinosaurs might have remained minor players. But the world shifted, and dinosaurs stepped forward. By the middle of the period, their diversity was unmistakable. Sauropodomorphs grazed in herds, reshaping vegetation. Theropods hunted in packs, leaving bone beds of multiple individuals together, hinting at social behavior. Ornithischians, the third great branch of the dinosaur tree, began their slow rise with small herbivores adapted for nibbling low plants. Each lineage was modest still, but together they formed the framework of what would become the Jurassic world, vast herds of long-necked giants, predatory theropods stalking them, armored and horned dinosaurs filling niches of defense. The blueprint was drawn, even if the full picture was yet to be painted. The Earth itself reflected this transition. Pangaea was beginning to rift more seriously, splitting into northern Laurasia and southern Gondwana. New coastlines formed, seas flooded lowlands, climates diversified. Where once deserts had stretched unbroken, now forests and wetlands intermingled. This tectonic reorganization created ecological opportunities. Dinosaurs, adaptable and quick to spread, took advantage, reaching across continents, filling landscapes from South Africa to China to Europe. Their footprints and bones testify to this expansion, found in rocks of the same age on opposite sides of oceans that did not yet exist. By the end of the early Jurassic, the world had changed irrevocably. The extinction at the Triassic boundary had erased competitors and opened doors. Dinosaurs, seizing that chance, spread across the globe. They were not yet the colossal sauropods of the Middle Jurassic or the mighty predators of the Late Jurassic, but they were established. They had become, in only a few million years, the dominant vertebrates on land. The Earth had entered their age, and it would remain in their hands for over 100 million years. Legacy line: the early Jurassic was the dawn of dinosaur dominance, a time of forests regrowing, seas reviving, and reptiles reinventing themselves for new worlds. Forward hook: the Middle Jurassic would build upon this foundation, unleashing the true giant sauropods that shook the ground, predators that rivaled them, and seas teeming with creatures that turned oceans into arenas of power. The early Jurassic had opened. the stage 4 dinosaurs on land. But beneath the waves, a different drama was unfolding. As the continents of Pangaea slowly fractured, new seaways opened, coastlines lengthened, and shallow marine environments multiplied. Into these waters spilled life, both old and new. Ammonites, those spiraled cephalopods, rebounded spectacularly from the Triassic-Jurassic extinction, evolving forms so varied that they became the timekeepers of the Mesozoic. Reptiles once tied to the land had fully embraced the sea, their bodies streamlined, their limbs reshaped into flippers. The Jurassic seas were not merely arenas of survival, they were theaters of abundance, filled with predators and prey locked in endless pursuit. To imagine those waters is to picture a blue world alive with movement. Sleek ichthyosaurs darted like living torpedoes, their eyes enormous, capable of peering into depths where light vanished. They gave birth to live young at sea, cutting ties to land entirely. Fossils from Holzminden, Germany, preserve mothers in the act of giving birth. Tiny skeletons curled within larger bodies, frozen in stone. Some specimens show fish scales still within rib cages, their last meals immortalized. These are not just skeletons, but moments of life caught mid-struggle, mid-birth. Sharing the seas were reptiles with long necks that arched like swans and bodies powered by 4 paddle-shaped flippers. Some, like Cryptoclydus, hunted fish with rows of slender teeth. Others, shorter-necked pliosaurs, developed massive jaws and became apex predators. Their bite marks gouged into the bones of other marine reptiles, with necks stretching meters and bodies built for maneuvering. Plesiosaurs transformed the seas into a place where reptiles played roles once reserved for fish. The abundance of ammonites was staggering. Their shells, coiled in perfect spirals, recorded both beauty and biology. Each whorl grew as the animal added chambers, filling them with gas or liquid to adjust buoyancy. In limestones across Europe and Asia, their fossils appear by the thousands, so common and so distinct that paleontologists use them to define ages within the Jurassic. Yet these shells also tell a story of resilience. Ammonites had nearly vanished in earlier extinctions, but in the Jurassic they flourished, diversifying into countless species, each with ornamentation ribs, spines, nodes that may have deterred predators or strengthened shells against pressure. Forensic traces deepen our view of these seas. Coprolites, the fossilized droppings of marine reptiles, sometimes contain fragments of ammonite shell, their spiral whorls shattered in digestion. Others hold fish bones, scales still glittering in thin sections. Stomach contents preserved in ichthyosaurs include belemnite squid-like creatures, whose bullet-shaped guards survive as fossils. These details reveal food webs complex and interwoven. Ammonites preyed upon plankton, fish fed on invertebrates, reptiles hunted both fish and cephalopods, and in turn, larger reptiles preyed upon smaller ones. The Jurassic seas were not static but alive with pursuit and evasion, with predators testing prey adapting to survive. On the seafloor, communities rebuilt as well. Bivalves carpeted shallows, some anchored with byssal threads, others burrowing into sediment. Crinoid sea lilies with feathery arms swayed in currents, filtering food. Brachiopods, once dominant in Paleozoic seas, lingered in reduced numbers, their shells clinging to rocks. Reef systems, though not as extensive as Devonian giants, reassembled around corals and sponges, creating havens for fish and invertebrates. Each environment layered complexity onto recovery. turning oceans into tapestries of habitats. The fossil record of the Jurassic seas is among the richest on Earth. In England's Blue Lias Cliffs at Lyme Regis, Mary Anning unearthed ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and ammonites in the early 19th century, fossils that transformed science's understanding of deep time. In Germany's Solnhofen limestone, entire marine communities are preserved in exquisite detail, down to the outlines of soft-bodied animals. In China's Yunnan province, marine reptiles and invertebrates reveal Asia's contribution to these seas. Each site is not just a record, but a window, showing the vibrancy of oceans more than 180 million years ago. Philosophically, these seas remind us that life is not confined to land, and that dominance takes many forms. While dinosaurs began their reign above ground, reptiles and ammonites ruled below the waves. Their adaptations speak to the creativity of evolution. Legs transformed into paddles, lungs adapted for deep diving, shells sculpted into artful defenses. The resilience shown after extinctions is humbling. What had been nearly erased rebounded into profusion, not as a replica of the past, but as a new creation, a reinvention of life in liquid form. Geologically, the seas recorded tectonic shifts. As Pangaea broke apart, new coastlines and shallow seas expanded habitats. Volcanic activity continued along rifts, but it also fertilized waters with nutrients, stimulating blooms of plankton that fed entire food webs. Carbonate platforms accumulated, thick layers of limestone that today form cliffs and quarries across Europe. Within them, ammonites and belemnites mark time, their abundance a geologic metronome. Each shell is a clock, ticking in spirals, measuring millions of years. Predators reached new heights. In later Jurassic seas, pliosaurs like Lioploidin grew massive, their skulls stretching meters, their bites capable of shattering bone. Though these giants came later, the early and middle Jurassic saw their ancestors refining the tools of dominance. Fossilized jaws with bite marks from rivals tell of battles at sea, predators clashing in waters where survival demanded power as much as speed. These were oceans of competition, but also of balance. Each niche filled, each role tested. The atmosphere of the Jurassic seas, if one could drift there, would be alien yet strangely familiar. Schools of fish darting in coordinated flashes, ammonites spiraling upward in swarms, ichthyosaurs breaking the surface for air, plesiosaurs gliding with necks weaving like serpents. Above, pterosaurs wheeled along coastlines, their shadows crossing waves. Below, crinoids swayed, silent gardens of stone and living arms. It was a living mosaic, as rich in interactions as any modern reef, though with players long vanished. Philosophically, the seas teach another lesson, that extinction is not final silence, but prelude. The oceans had been devastated twice in the great dying of the Permian, and again at the end of the Triassic. Yet here they flourished, filled with life of new kinds, innovating with forms and strategies unseen before. It is a humbling truth. Earth forgets, but life remembers how to begin again. By the close of the Jurassic, the seas had reached a grandeur unmatched in earlier eras. Ammonites and belemnites were countless, ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs abundant, pliosaurs terrifying. The oceans were arenas of movement, of hunts, of endless cycles of growth and loss. And like the land, they were preparing for further change. The Cretaceous lay ahead, with its own revolutions, its own giants, and its own extinctions. Legacy line, the Jurassic seas were theaters of rebirth and abundance, ruled by ammonites and marine reptiles that turned oceans into realms of predators and prey. Forward hook, as the Jurassic continued. The reign of dinosaurs on land and reptiles at sea would expand to new heights, but in the end, even these giants would yield to the deep patience of the earth. The journey from the Devonian to the early Jurassic is a span of nearly 200 million years. To follow it is to watch Earth transform again and again, each age leaving traces that endure, each extinction sweeping the board and each recovery writing a new hand of life. It is not a single story, but a chain of inheritances. Forests rising from swamp soils, carbon drawn down into stone, reptiles inheriting from amphibians, mammals' ancestors eclipsed by reptiles, oceans emptied and then filled again. The legacy of these ages is not permanence, but continuity, a rhythm of loss and renewal inscribed in stone. It began in the Devonian, when fish grew limbs and forests rooted into soil. The air itself changed under their influence. Carbon dioxide drawn down, oxygen raised, the stage prepared for terrestrial life. That green revolution left a gift in the seams of coal still mined today, a black memory of leaves long decayed. The Carboniferous built upon that gift, turning swamps into vaults of carbon, oxygen into fuel for giants, insects with wings like kites and amphibians large as crocodiles. Yet even then, fragility lurked. Climate shifted, forests fragmented, and the Permian dawned with deserts spreading across Pangaea. The Permian crowned reptiles and synapsids, their eggs carrying life away from swamps, their sails rising into desert sun. Synapsids, like Dimetrodon, hunted across floodplains. Dicynodonts browsed on glossopterid leaves, and Gorgonopsids bared saber-like canines. Their bones filled the Karoo Basin, their trackways pressed into red beds. They seemed secure. But the earth is not a stage that preserves actors forever. The great dying struck, the most severe extinction in the planet's history, erasing 9 of every 10 species, silencing reefs, collapsing forests, suffocating oceans. The Permian's legacy was not triumph, but a warning that even dominance is temporary, even resilience has limits. The Triassic inherited this silence. At first, it was a barren world, with few survivors, Lystrosaurus burrowing in parched soils, hardy ferns spiking across ruined landscapes. Oceans stagnated, forests withered. Recovery was hesitant, stumbling for millions of years. But persistence has power. By the Middle Triassic, life had reinvented itself. Archosaurs tested new forms. Crocodilekin, Rhesuchians, armored etosaurs, small bipedal dinosaurs. In the seas, ichthyosaurs returned to water. Ammonites spiraled into abundance. Reefs reassembled. It was a world alive again, though built from new designs. The late Triassic was a world of experiments. Rhesuchians towered as predators. Phytosaurs filled rivers. Etosaurs armored themselves against attack. Dinosaurs were present, but modest. Small hunters and omnivores running on 2 legs. The earth cracked under the strain of tectonics, rifts opening, volcanism stirring. Then, as the Triassic ended, fire returned. The central Atlantic magmatic province poured lava across continents, exhaled greenhouse gases, and once more ecosystems fell. Rhesuchians, etosaurs, phytosaurs all gone. Dinosaurs endured. In their survival, the course of the Mesozoic was set. The early Jurassic opened with forests returning, conifers stretching skyward, cycads dotting plains, ferns carpeting understories. Dinosaurs, no longer minor actors, spread across continents. Sauropodomorphs lengthened their necks, feeding high in trees. Theropods sharpened teeth and claws, hunting with new efficiency. Ornithischians began to rise, nibbling low plants, filling roles of herbivores alongside their long-necked cousins. Oceans thrived as well, ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, swimming among ammonites that multiplied in spiraled abundance. Trackways pressed into floodplains, shells layered into limestone, bones buried in shale ore, evidence of a dawn that was also a declaration. Dinosaurs had inherited the earth.